that we on the scientific side, and I'm going to say we because, technically I'm a neuroscientist.
Sure.
But we are, I think, guilty of a lot of hubris at times. And I think it's in this sense that, we have this explained.
Sure.
We have that explained. A functional MRI shows this part of the brain lighting up when we think we saw a ghost. Therefore, we know exactly what happens when we see a ghost. I think that we stretch things way far, and I don't think science is designed to give us incontrovertible truths. I think
absolutely
science is trying to explain the world that we encounter as best we can so that it becomes, again, understandable, workable, predictable. But it's always, to me, I think, an approximation as opposed to we are unveiling the truth.
Welcome to Kentucky.
The birthplace of Abraham Lincoln and built on the largest cave system in the known world. The home of Daniel Boone, Hunter S. Thompson, horse racing, and bourbon.
But when the hour grows late, the bluegrass state becomes the breeding ground for realms beyond those familiar to the human race. In the east, ghosts, spirits, and ethereal entities roam the hills and hollers.
In the north, Mothman beats his wings along the banks of the Ohio River.
To the west, small green creatures stalk farmhouses and disappear without a trace when shot.
While in the south, the energy of the veiled witch is palpable just over the border. Joining with us as we investigate just what goes wrong in the bluegrass night.
Ask the question, how many coincidences are too many? There's no need to check the clock.
There's no need to check the clock. Time is an illusion.
Time is an illusion.
And it's midnight.
It's midnight. In Kentucky.
In Kentucky.
In Kentucky. In Kentucky. In Kentucky.
Nightowls of all times, places, spaces, and ages, the full moon has risen once again, and you are listening to Midnight in Kentucky. It's that time again, Night Owls, when the veil between our world and what lies beyond is supposedly at its thinnest. But what of those for whom that membrane between life as we know it and whatever may lay outside of it at any time may wane complete, allowing for a pure gaze into the abyss? Neurosurgeon and unlikely war hero Ryan Brenan, protagonist of Dr. Gary Simonds' latest novel Death's Pale Flag, is a man haunted by just such a view. When he begins to have experiences with the dead, Ryan's life is upended, and he begins to question if he is losing his mind, or if the dearly departed who are seemingly reaching out to him have chosen him for a reason. Tonight on MIK, we sit down for an in-depth conversation with Dr. Simonds on his latest work and just what inspired this tale of a man beset by paranormal apparitions. In this episode, we talk hopeful agnosticism, the borderline between science and the supernatural, what it means to peer through the veil of life and death, and so much more. Join us under the moonlight and by the fireside this evening, Night Owls, as we capture Death's Pale Flag and go in conversation with Dr. Gary Simonds. Before we begin our conversation this evening, remember to check us out online on our Facebook and our website. That's Midnight in Kentucky on Facebook and www.midnightinkentucky.com. We're always posting on both those, sighting reports, blog posts, new episodes, whatever we got coming out. You can find it on our Facebook or our website. In addition to those two, check out our publishing company's YouTube channel for all your Midnight in Kentucky episodes on YouTube. That's Ransom Letter Publishing on YouTube. There's also the Ransom Letter Publishing TeePublic, where you can find all your MIK merch and much more from all of Ransom Letter Publishing's productions. And in addition to both those, we now have the Ransom Letter Radio podcast. On Ransom Letter Radio, you're going to hear me talking with artists, creatives, magicians, spiritual followers, leaders, whatever. Honestly, on Ransom Letter Radio, I kind of do whatever I want. And we get much more woo than I like getting on this show. We get way more into astrology and tarot and synchronicity and all that stuff. So if you dig that, be sure to check out Ransom Letter Radio. I'm really enjoying doing it, and I think it's a good companion to Midnight in Kentucky. You know, this show, we deal with the paranormal, supernatural, the sightings, the witnesses. On that show, we deal with more of the spiritual woo side of it all, I guess. So check that out, Ransom Letter Radio. Check out the Ransom Letter Publishing TeePublic, and check out the Ransom Letter Publishing YouTube. You can find all of those on our website. Just go to midnightinkentucky.com. You can find the Patreon and the YouTube right there. And in addition to both those, you can also find this on our website. It's our Patreon, the Midnight in Kentucky Patreon. Right now, if you sign up on the Patreon, you will be refunded until 2024. So now's a great time to sign up. You can check out the content we've already got up. There's not a lot going on at the Patreon right now, but we're going to start in 2024 hitting that shit up all the time once again. And I know I say that a lot, but I'm in it this time, and we're doing it. And, you know, there's a lot already there. There's a lot that's already offered on the Patreon, and I feel like, you know, we got some quality stuff over there. So now's a great time to get in. You're going to be refunded for October, November, and December, so you're not even paying for those 3 months. And if you like what you're seeing and you like what you're hearing over there, stay and see what's coming up for 2024, because there's a lot of cool stuff coming up. All right, that's all the housekeeping I have. Want to thank Dr. Gary Simonds one more time for coming on the show. This is such a great conversation. I loved every minute of it. There's so many great things that can be pulled out of it. So that being said, let's get into it.
It must be quite the experience for you, because I'm sure you speak to a lot of people who have had, you know, atypical encounters in their lives, and it just must be fascinating to be able to talk to people in depth about that sort of thing and the various beliefs and the various circumstances. So you must have a whole wealth of these experiences to pull on.
You know, it very much is. And I'm very, very grateful, as I always say, to anybody who, you know, wants to come to me and share these stories, because as I'm sure you know, it's hard. I mean, even for non-paranormal things, it's hard to go to your doctor and say, I've been experiencing these type of symptoms. It's hard to come to somebody and say, listen, I think my reality might be breaking down. I've been seeing, you know, things that I'm not sure are real. And for me, you know, very similar to yourself, I think I try my best to not, I refer to myself as a hopeful agnostic on a lot of things, because I'm very hopeful that, you know, something exists beyond this world, as I think all of us, most of us are. But I don't want to buy completely into anything, because I am unsure. I'm not sure what exactly is happening. I'm not sure what people are seeing, or where the things that people are seeing are coming from, or anything like that. Under the full moon and by the fireside, with us this evening, Night Owls, we have Dr. Gary Simonds, seasoned neurosurgeon and author of the new novel, Death's Pale Flag, a riveting psychological thriller that uniquely blends a detailed look behind the curtains of modern-day neurosurgery with a fantastical journey into the paranormal. Dr. Simonds, thank you so much for joining us today. I can't tell you how much I'm looking forward to talking with you about this book.
Well, thank you so much. I'm excited too.
Just starting out and kind of reading through the literature that was, you know, kind of sent over to get ready for this interview. I know that you have written 3 nonfiction books already, that this is your first novel. Am I correct?
Yes, sir. That is true. Well, it's the first novel that I've put out there.
I understand.
There's 1 or 2 under a bed somewhere.
Don't we all have those? I have plenty of those, secret novels myself. Maybe someday they'll come to light. But something, of course, this podcast deals with the strange, the otherworldly, the supernatural, paranormal, exactly, kind of what the book details, and something I've always found close to my heart in this field. To me, I love hearing the ghost stories. I love hearing the weirdness. I love hearing all of that. But something that really drew me into this show and drew me into talking to authors and witnesses and things like that of the paranormal is how much it affects people when they have something like this happen to them. How it affects the brain. What are those experiences? What are those, what are those things doing to us, and what may be causing those experiences? So, being a neurosurgeon, I'm excited to talk to you about some of that. And a lot of that is exactly what this book goes into.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it really gets into a duality. We like to have explanations for everything. I think for all of us, it orders our world a lot more. It makes things more predictable, reproducible. We kind of assures us that the sun's going to rise every day and there's going to be food in the supermarket and things like that. And I think when we experience something that is not fitting the normal paradigms of life, it really, the system has to reset. It has to figure out what the heck is going on and how does that fit in with all these paradigms that we've set up? And is it going to disrupt everything, or am I going to be able to incorporate it? So yeah, I find it fascinating.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, just to start off, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about what led you to this point where you wrote this novel and kind of what led you to write the novel in the first place.
Yeah, I think. Do you want the several-hour version, or should I give you a couple minutes here?
Hey, I'm always about give the audience as much as you can. So please feel free to tell the longest version. I'm always interested in the story, of course.
Yeah, I think what happens, like so many things that we do in life, I think many roads kind of intertwine and intersect at some point, and it precipitates some sort of response, some sort of behavior. But I've been a neurosurgeon for decades, and you see all sorts of things and experience all sorts of things, not the least of which is a lot of death and dying and tragedy and that sort of thing. And our world is really thick in it. And it's an exciting world. You do see these horrible things. You also see really the high points of just the sheer bravery and guts and grace of the people who are afflicted by these horrible diseases or horrible injuries, and not just the people but their families. It is the rare day where I've experienced someone who was not unbelievably full of grace and character and benevolence and gratitude and that sort of thing. And that always inspired me. So that was running through all this. And I wanted, as I was working, to someday kind of pull the curtains back, if you will, let people see both kind of the raw science and raw medicine of it, but also the people involved, the people who are being affected and their stories, if you will.
Absolutely.
And then I for the last 15 years or so, I got very interested in the effects of all this on the caregivers themselves, on healthcare workers. And so my three other books are on burnout. They're on burnout and healthcare workers, and what are the things that precipitate it, and what we can do to try to prevent the burnout. Because of course, if your healthcare workers, if your providers are burned out, you're not going to get as good a care.
Absolutely, yes.
So that became a central theme, where the main protagonist, Ryan Brenan, a brain surgeon, of course, he's clearly burning out on one level or another, and clearly being, kind of crushed by the psychology of his world. And then I was explaining the other day, I was raised, if you talk about dualism that we were talking about earlier, I had a family where my father was an eternal skeptic and dismissed everything and was sarcastic and cynical about, anything that wasn't right there in front of you. And then the other side of the family was from Scotland. My mother and my grandmother were off the boat. And my grandmother lived in the house with us.
Wow. Okay. And
they were confirmed believers in everything supernatural.
Absolutely.
And had, dozens of their own stories. So as a kid, that was just woven into my fabric. And I read every book and watched every, spooky movie and everything related. And so, again, this was a long story, and forgive me for doing it.
Absolutely not. I'm enjoying it. Go right ahead.
But when I decided to pull that curtain back and actually sit down and write about it all, there are some actually very nice books about the neurosurgical world that are nonfiction, and they are great books, but they can feel a little didactic. And I wanted to put the reader right there. I wanted,
absolutely,
for the reader to be holding the scalpel, or the reader to be watching the brain bleeding and trying to figure out what to do. And so I thought fiction might be a better way to do that, to really immerse the reader in the experience. And so what are you going to do with the fiction? One of the books under my bed, the fiction novel, is a neurosurgeon who discovers a plot to kill Supreme Court justices.
Oh, wow.
Creating aneurysms in their brain. And
that sounds amazing. I would read that.
The brave neurosurgeon figures it out. And of course, he runs into a beautiful FBI agent. And so it all goes from there.
Well, that neurosurgeon could be Ryan. That could be the sequel.
Except for he's married. I don't know how she's going to take to the beautiful FBI
there you go. Yeah, that's fair.
But anyway, that's where that thread of my childhood being immersed in the world of ghosts and the undead and stuff all of a sudden popped up. And I said, well, geez, if you accept that these are ghosts in Ryan's world rather than his brain malfunctioning,
right?
I thought, well, if ghosts are trying to reach us, if ghosts are trying to contact us or touch us in somehow, maybe an ideal candidate would be somebody who's there. And I talked about it as being a bridge between life and death, because that's what a lot of neurosurgeons are. They are right there on the bridge.
Absolutely.
And they're either ushering people, one way
or the other,
pull people back the other way. And maybe the ghosts kind of start getting familiar, well, there's that same old guy standing at the bridge.
Right.
And maybe he's the easiest person for me to grab, for me to reach out to, for me to contact. So anyway, that's how that started to evolve. And therefore the ghosts became kind of the main fiction driver in the book. Because there's a lot of neurosurgery in the book and a lot of real life stuff. But the main fiction driver was this interface with the undead, if you will, and whether that was real or whether it's all part, a figment of his imagination.
And my favorite stories are always those stories, and even hearing stories of people's real encounters with the paranormal. My favorite stories are always those stories that it leaves you to wonder, is this happening in what I refer to as consensus reality that we all can, that we all consensusly agree upon, or is this happening somewhere in the reality that exists within their mind so my favorite stories are always those stories of where exactly is this experience occurring and what exactly is occurring, and this story, man, it does a great job of pulling off that, not to give away too much, but there at the end where Reverend Ron and Ryan kind of run through all the different types of doctors that looked over him, and he says the psychologists think it's this, the neurologist,
Right.
and he's all like, "Yep, pretty much sums it up." And at the end of the day, there's no real answers about what happened exactly to Ryan, but you said something about wanting to write it in a way that made the audience feel like they were holding the scalpel. And geez, it really does. Part of me when I was reading this, and maybe this is due to like Ryan's war experiences in the novel, but part of me when I was reading this, it felt almost like reading a war journal in a way of somebody just constantly having to deal with this trauma over and over and over. And, his emotions and what exactly was occurring in his reality because of all of that.
Yeah, it's a wonderful point. It's a wonderful point because I totally agree with you in that I've always said, and particularly, when we're trying to bring new people in, because we were training med students and residents and stuff. But I would say, listen, guys, this is probably the closest that any of us will get to war.
Yeah.
In that you are exposed to just incredibly horrible stuff. And stuff that is going to shock your system, and it's going to happen over and over and over again. And somehow we have to adjust to that. So I 100% agree with you.
Absolutely. And, it does seem for whatever reason or another, that the supernatural, the paranormal attracts itself to trauma, particularly obviously death. And, the novel kind of alludes to exactly what you're talking about right now, that thin line between life and death. And can you give us a few examples of that constant exposure to death and that, like, how it can affect the perception of your reality and how that can influence maybe having some supernatural encounters?
Yeah, we can go down many streams on this one, but let's just start with kind of the daily exposure. And, not every neurosurgeon deals with this. And there are certainly many other specialists who have to deal with it and other careers. It's not just medicine.
Sure.
But certainly in the world that I knew, which was always at these, what they call level 1 trauma centers, which means they have these helicopters flying in people all the time. And it's not just car accidents and gunshot wounds and stuff like that. When you have this busy acute care center, there's always, strokes and hemorrhages and ruptured aneurysms and brain tumors and seizures and all this sort of thing going on all the time. And oddly enough, it always comes in at night. It just feels like it's always in the middle of the night.
Absolutely.
We even studied it, and the grand majority do come in the middle of the night. So you're already in that kind of sleep deprived zone, right? And these, one horrible thing happens after another, and there's always stories affixed to it, and the stories are horrible. And you're just kind of shaking your head, and you really don't have a lot of time to process it. So you kind of roll from one disaster into another, just trying to do what you can, kind of like the Dutch boy with the finger in the dike type of situation, felt like. But anyway, this almost becomes your norm. So, at one point, when I was studying the burnout, I had my whole team take diaries out, and they were to take notes when they actually got out of the hospital, got into a nice restaurant, were having a dinner and being around a bunch of healthy, happy people. And it was very interesting, their responses. They all noted kind of a distinct discomfort and a feeling that reality was bent. And reality was bent not in the hospital, but when they were out there in a happy world. And they were like, no, this isn't the real world. The real world is where people are dying and families are crying and we're having to give horrible news and stuff. And they actually went as far as saying, sometimes I'd look at somebody and think, well, I'll be seeing you on a stretcher in the ER in a while. And so you can see the real impact, and how penetrating this was into the psyche. They weren't able to leave it at the door. It was there. and pervasive everywhere in their lives. And I say they, certainly me included.
Sure.
And so then you can imagine where, it wouldn't take much to tip these kind of thoughts and feelings over the edge. You see something that's just a little off, and I would imagine, the brain could take off into tremendous flights of fancy if you wanted to look at it purely from a psychological point of view, or you could flip it the other way to the supernatural and say, it's almost like you've trained your brain to be a better receiver.
Sure. Yeah.
Things that are off kilter.
Sure. Well, you talking about, and this is very present in the novel. This is very much what Ryan is. You talking about the neurosurgeon being that middle ground on that bridge between life and death, and constantly, archetypically in mythology, that's the ferryman, is it not? That's the one who gives that ushers you across the bridge and brings you back.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that one fell on the cutting room floor, but there was some discussion about maybe, the other side not being so happy about pulling some people back.
Sure, absolutely right. Well, and we may as well go ahead and dive headlong into it now. Of course, Ryan's story, it has him, like we were talking about, addressing all of this trauma, addressing all of this is violence throughout word, addressing all of this just tremendous awfulness, and like you said, you just have to roll right into one from the other. But it seems like earlier on in the book, and I took a photo of this and I sent it to my wife because she kind of does the show, with me when I'm not doing guests. And I asked her thoughts on it. It mentions Ryan's old friends, and it mentions his sleep paralysis going back years. And what hung up for me on that was, of course, on this show, and one of my favorite subjects of the paranormal, which, I'm of the belief it all kind of ties into one thing. It's all kind of one phenomena presenting itself in different ways. But one of my favorite areas of the paranormal is alien abductions. And this may, be a far cry from ghosts, but I do think that there are kind of, very obviously similarities between the two phenomena. And when Ryan was describing his interactions with his old friends, I sent that paragraph to my wife and I was like, does this remind you of what an alien abduction? And of course, sleep paralysis and alien abductions are very closely related. There's been some studies on that, but I was just wondering if you could talk for a minute about what inspired those old friends and how that kind of hits later on in the story.
Yeah, and I'm glad in some ways you didn't ask me directly about alien abductions, because I don't have any knowledge base.
Sure.
And so I'm not going to pretend that I can
absolutely
shine any light on it. But I do know a fair amount about what we'll call sleep disorders.
Sure. And that kind of plays a large role in the book, is sleep overall, which plays a large role in the paranormal. I found sleep, for whatever reason, plays a role much larger into all of this. But I'm sorry, please.
Oh, no. I agree with you. And again, it's, I was just talking to a neuroscientist friend of mine the other day about, we spend so much time in sleep, and yet
right.
The amount of real hard research going on is pretty limited.
Yes.
And certainly our knowledge of all that goes on in sleep is pretty limited. And so it leaves it open, certainly, for a lot of speculation. But if you get to, this concept of interface with the supernatural or the paranormal, it does seem like, all of us, I think, are bigger believers in the middle of the night than we are when it's bright lights and everything is out around there. I think because we take away a lot of, again, that the stuff that I don't know, roots us,
right.
that sets the foundation square. And when it's dark, and when you haven't been sleeping, and And I think a lot of that is taken away, and then it just opens up your mind for, well, what if this could occur? What about that? What was that noise? What was this feeling? But you know, in the book, I wanted viable potential, scientifically, let's put it that way, and we can get into that whole science and spirituality side of this, but
absolutely,
I wanted some scientific explanations for the ghostly interfaces, to put that doubt in everybody's mind,
right?
And I wanted them to be at least scientifically acceptable or believable, at least.
Sure.
So I figured, you know, all that sleep deprivation, he's already showing evidence of what they call sleep pathologies. He has a history of sleep pathologies. So it would be so easy potentially for sleep to be invading his conscience, you know, his consciousness, his wakeful states, and therefore play out these dramas in his mind. And I wanted that to feel like a very plausible explanation as well, because I didn't want to just say, oh, well, you know, here's a neurosurgery story, and now here's a ghost story.
Right,
I wanted the two to be intertwined.
Absolutely.
So I guess that's how that got in there, about and I wanted, it made it to me much easier for it to fall into, he's already had these problems. They're there. And then I tied them back to his father dying, which to me made even more sense.
Absolutely.
That's where all that stuff comes from.
I love it. Honestly, it was, and this is to me, this is a sign of a good writer. It's the things on the edge of vision, the nuance, you know, things like that are just like, oh, I want to know more about that, you know, but it propels it in such a direction that they do come up again. The old friends do come up again. And there's this question of, are these new friends his old friends?
Right.
And I love that. One of the things, I know you said you didn't know much about alien abductions, but there's not a lot of opportunity that I have to talk to a neurosurgeon. So I gotta ask you a few things. Are you familiar with the work of Whitley Strieber at all?
The name is familiar, but you'd have to clue me in.
He was a horror writer in the late 80s. He supposedly had an interaction with, you know, I hesitate to call them extraterrestrials. I say non-human entities. He supposedly had an interaction with non-human entities at his cabin in the late 80s. This led to him writing Communion, which is one of the big alien abduction novels. Famously has the gray alien on the cover. At some point, and Whitley Strieber, you know, one of the things that sticks out to me so much about his encounters is at one point, one of these non-human beings says, Whitley, what you don't understand is all of this has to do with what you call death. And, you know, there's so many alien encounters where people see dead loved ones along with the non-human beings, which is not commonly reported on for whatever reason, but there are a substantial number of cases. And, you know, to me, that kind of loops this whole realm in together. It's all about this thing that we know as death. And there are other studies, and I cite this study all the time. I need to find it and put it in the show notes. Listeners, I'm going to do that. But there are other studies that liken experiences like near-death experiences, alien abductions, and experiences with certain psychedelics to the same experience to the brain. And I was just wondering, maybe, you know, with your experiences, if you could say anything about that, if there's anything there that kind of sparked something in your mind.
Yeah, well, certainly, you know, as you were describing that, as you were describing that, there are certainly parallels with people who report near-death experiences.
Absolutely.
And you know, there's just been a flurry of discussions about that in the neuroscience literature.
Interesting.
In that there's been some recordings, some EEG recordings of people who who die, who
Sure, yeah.
have all the EEGs in place, and they're running, and they were finding this sunburst of activity that resembled people's minds when they're really thinking hard or experiencing something, getting a lot of stimulation.
Sure.
And so, the scientist side of this is saying, okay, now we have an explanation. The brain, for whatever reason, kicks into this high gear, and all these things are probably playing out in the brain just at that moment of death. And those who get pulled back may be recalling some of what happened. And then you could make up things from there. I mean,
sure, yeah.
Why would that be so hard to, or why wouldn't it be easy to mix that up with, or think, oh no, I've been abducted, and
sure.
my experiences were, in seeing my loved ones and all that sort of thing, we're on an alien ship. Anyway,
sure.
You could start connecting the dots. Now, I will say this is all loose science. It is not super hard science. So, we see this burst of activity, and all of a sudden we're saying, oh, we've got it all explained. Because that's the way we like it. We like everything tied up in a bow.
Yes.
And say, oh yeah, no, now we get it. And therefore all near-death experiences or post-death experiences, or whatever we want to call them, they're just a function of our brain firing off at those last seconds. But you can flip it around. You can say, well, why would the brain do that anyway?
Sure.
Does that make any sense? Could it be that we're just seeing a reflection of a soul replaying their life? I don't know.
Sure.
I'm not pretending I have the answer. Like you and I was listening to your really wonderful discussion with Len Hightower.
Thank you so much.
You guys talked about this, and it really resonated with me, that we on the scientific side, and I'm going to say we because, technically I'm a neuroscientist.
Sure.
But we are, I think, guilty of a lot of hubris at times. And I think it's in this sense that, oh, we have this explained.
Sure.
Oh, we have that explained. A functional MRI shows this part of the brain lighting up when we think we saw a ghost. Therefore, we know exactly what happens when we see a ghost. I think that we stretch things way far, and I don't think science is designed to give us incontrovertible truths. I think
absolutely
science is trying to explain the world that we encounter as best we can, so that it becomes, again, understandable, workable, predictable. But it's always, to me, I think, an approximation, as opposed to we are unveiling the truth. And you guys even touched on it, but the brain is a very imperfect machine. It does not pick up everything that's around us. It takes a very narrow picture of what's going on around us in all our senses. It shields out a heck of a lot of the stuff that's coming in.
Right.
And then we construct versions of our world that we're constantly comparing what's coming in to those versions. This is why sometimes memory can be really distorted.
Absolutely.
Sometimes those versions are way off.
Absolutely.
So anyway, there's this hubris that this very imperfect brain is going to explain everything in existence.
Sure.
And then even be able to understand it. So I've always kept the door super open. I know I'm rambling on about this.
Absolutely not. This is it. This is the podcast right here, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, good, but it does drive me crazy when we act as if we know everything. I always see it as another article of faith, if you will, and we can look so disdainfully at people who are religious, or people who believe in alien abductions, or people who believe in ghosts or whatever, and we can look so disdainfully and say, yeah, you're believing in something that can't be proven. And then I turn around and I go, really? Like an astrophysicist can really prove that there are other dimensions and other universes.
Sure.
So I think that's why another reason why I wrote the book as I did is I really love this sort of conversation. I love entering into these types of conversations. I want the readers to think about things like that collision or that interface of science and the fantastic or the supernatural or the paranormal.
Absolutely.
And talk to me about it. And so, like, on my website, there's easy ways to connect with me and stuff. But I love these sort of discussions.
Very cool. I like that a lot. There's so many times that authors, whether they be fiction authors or authors who are writing, nonfiction, put out work and they're like, that's it. I don't want to talk to anybody. Of course there are tours, but they don't want. So I love the fact that you are saying, I want to enter into these conversations. This is what I want out of this. That's awesome.
Well, I sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
It must be quite the experience for you, because I'm sure you speak to a lot of people who have had, atypical encounters in their lives. And it just must be fascinating to be able to talk to people in depth about that sort of thing and the various beliefs and the various circumstances. So you must have a whole wealth of these experiences to pull on.
It very much is. And I'm very, very grateful, as I always say, to anybody who, wants to come to me and share these stories, because as I'm sure it's hard. I mean, even for non-paranormal things, it's hard to go to your doctor and say, I've been experiencing these type of symptoms. It's hard to come to somebody and say, listen, I think my reality might be breaking down. I've been seeing, things that I'm not sure are real. And for me, very similar to yourself, I think I try my best to not, I refer to myself as a hopeful agnostic on a lot of things, because I'm very hopeful that, something exists beyond this world, as I think most of us are. But I don't want to buy completely into anything because I am unsure. I'm not sure what exactly is happening. I'm not sure what people are seeing or where the things that people are seeing are coming from or anything like that. But kind of what you were talking about, it's exemplified perfectly in the book when Kelly talks to Ryan's psychologist. And he says something along the lines of, well, we don't run around putting people that go to church every Sunday and literally believe that they're taking the blood and flesh of Christ, and we don't put them on antipsychotics. So how is this that much different than that? Which, the further I get into the supernatural, because we go to church every Sunday. My family's very religious. The further I get into the supernatural, though, the more I understand that a lot of spirituality is simply having encounters with the supernatural, and that goes back thousands of years. So I loved that point that you made of how we kind of do have a double standard on how we treat people that we think are crazy and people who we think maybe they're having a legitimate spiritual experience.
Right. If Ryan were to come into the C's might say, congratulations, or, I'm proud of you, or something like that. If Ryan comes into the CEO's office and says, I'm pretty sure I've been experiencing some interactions with ghosts.
Sure.
He may be put on the bench. He may not be allowed to operate.
Sure, exactly. And that distinction is so interesting to me, and just how we deal with that distinction in our everyday lives. You mentioned, though, and this book does such a good job of cutting that middle ground of the science and the spiritual. And when I was talking to Lynn, we talked a lot about that because a lot of, her book dealt with something similar, but this opportunity kind of landed in my lap to speak with somebody who kind of has firsthand experience of all of this. And I was kind of wondering, obviously you have experiences with both. You have experiences with the science and the spiritual. And I was wondering if you could just kind of talk about what it's like to balance that in your day-to-day work.
Yeah, so on one side of all this, by the way, another goal of mine in the book was to challenge the reader to figure out, or not to figure out, but to decide for themselves what actually was more scary, the paranormal world or the actual world of what goes on.
I would have far more wanted to deal with the ghosts than I would have the 100%. I kept telling my wife that too. I was like, man, I think I would take the ghosts over dealing with all of this trauma any day of the week.
Maybe I should have made the ghosts nastier.
I don't know. They were pretty rough.
But yeah, so, one answer to your question, though, is I think to survive those experiences, the very real experiences, I call it mayhem a lot of times. It's just mayhem.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I think to survive it, you have to shut down a lot. You have to shut down so much of who you are. And I think we all have versions of who we are and what we feel and all that sort of thing. And I think for many of us, it does extend beyond the pure physical. I think many of us like to believe we have a soul. We have
absolutely
a being that is that, I don't know, that feels more and is receptive to more and all that sort of thing. But I think there in the trenches, we have to shut it all down. Everything gets shut down. You're pretty much focused. The eyes are on the prize, if you will. And that is, what do I do to try to keep this person out of trouble? And we actually, I was in a discussion about this the other day with somebody, and they're saying, you are such a pessimist. And I said, I wasn't born a pessimist, but I was, for 30 years, I had to anticipate everything horrible that could go wrong in a situation. So anyway, you do get very scientific, if you will, or it's biomedical, or it's whatever it is. It's, how do I get from point A to point B? And it's interesting because you are so focused on that. I really do believe that you shut down all other pieces of yourself. I'll give you an example of that in a minute. But it was funny because every so often you'd be in the ICU and a patient would be in trouble, and you're waiting it out, and the family would be there. Can you pray with us?
Sure.
And I'm not a big, in public prayer.
Sure, absolutely.
And it could be of any faith. I mean, it was any faith that was asking you to do that. But it was it always felt like a sudden kind of shock into a different world where you just, wait a minute, I'm not thinking that way. I'm not.
Right.
And I would always say, sure, and I would do it and all that sort of thing. But it was funny just kind of the impact that it had, because it was almost like somebody was all of a sudden shoving a different world into this box that I have that is very constrained, because this is how we deal with these problems, and we deal with them very scientifically, very critically thinking, all that sort of thing. And we really don't have a lot of room for all the other pieces. And yet when we let ourselves go, when we let our own beings go, I think all of us are far more open to the outside world and outside worlds. And so it's just one other vignette about it. I think I personally, people have asked me, are you Ryan? And I go, oh, Ryan's a much nicer person than I am. And Ryan felt more than I did. Ryan, it impacted Ryan harder than me. My walls, I think, were stronger, and that's not better. I'm just saying they weren't breaking as easy as his.
Absolutely,
were. So, anything that Ryan is bad at in the book, that would be me. And anything he was good at, that was probably less of me. But for sure. But an interesting phenomena occurred, because I think I was very good at just keeping everything on a even keel. I didn't get upset. I didn't get angry. I didn't, lose it. I was never scared. I always told my residents, if you get frightened in the middle of an operation, you are just condemning your patient. You got to stay brave and confident that
Sure.
you're going to take care of it. Anyway, long story short, I retired a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And there's a story behind that, but I retired from what we call clinical neurosurgery, actually doing the operations. I still teach at medical school and undergrads and
Right.
stuff.
Okay.
But anyway, since that time, I have been one of the most emotional people I know. And I don't mean, hopefully not a lot of anger, but I could watch a tearjerker movie in the past and
Nothing.
sail right through it. Now,
Right.
like the opening credits, and my eyes are welling up.
Right.
And it's so bad, I'll watch some stupid commercial, and and same with joy. It's not just sadness; it's like joy. If something's happy or something's touching, and I feel it really deeply. So, to get back to your question, I think there's a huge amount of suppression and boxing off everything outside other than the prize, what we were going after.
Absolutely. And, what you just described to me is kind of the theme of the whole book. And I won't give that away to the audience, but at the end of Ron's experiences, it very much is he can feel everything much more deeply. And, I've had that experience myself. Nothing like going through war or that type of trauma, but, just the traumas that we incur over a lifetime. Recently, I kind of had to sit down and be like, bruh, you have got to deal with some of this or it's going to kill you. And when I did that, and when I started processing some of that, started to cry a lot more, started to feel joy a lot more, started to, and I think a lot of that is just not allowing, and I'm sure you know this better than I. You wrote 3 books on burnout, but I think a lot of that is just not allowing ourselves to slow down and to feel that. And when you are in those moments, I kind of things. You said that you often tell your students that this is the closest you can come to being at war. And while I've never been at war, I've studied martial arts and those type of things extensively. Not extensively. I'm still very much an amateur, but I have studied a lot and I still, but there's a old samurai literature, Miyamoto Musashi. One of his pieces of advice is to show reverence to the gods, but when it comes to warfare, to leave them there and make sure your weapons are prepared. And what you're describing is very much that. It's to pay reverence to the spiritual realm, but when it comes down to it, you have no time for that. You have to make sure your sword sharpened and that you're ready to go into battle.
Yeah, that's an amazing parallel. I like that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do completely understand that. I also have heard someone say this along the lines of, the most enlightened of us cry all of the time because they are aware of the trauma and the joy. And so maybe that will bring some comfort in all that crying. Perhaps you were just
become enlightened.
Yeah, that's the sad part, right? Cry all the time and I'm still not enlightened. So,
something, even that, it's again, there are so many conventions we put on things, all the machoism and all that sort of thing.
Very much.
But I will tell you, I feel so much better that I'm able to do that.
Absolutely.
It's a good feeling. It's not a bad feeling
at all. And that's the thing. I think so many times, we go through these traumas, and I think a lot of the times, or I have found in myself, the reason that I have kept myself from dealing with certain things is because I'm like, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt to deal with that. But then when you just address it and you go through it, it hurts a little bit. It's kind of like running. It hurts a little bit at first. And then you're like, oh, this feels good. I'm doing it, so.
I never reached that point on running.
I haven't either, but it always hurts. At the end of it, I'm like, oh, thank God it's over. I feel so much better. I can rest now.
Well, let me give you a little vignette on that one, because it just sparked an interesting thing. And it sounds horrible up front. But, again, we did a lot of work on burnout and what we call the opposite, which is resilience, is building resilience. That you can withstand trauma, you can withstand, stressors and stuff like that. But in one of the resilience sessions, we got talking about giving bad news to families in our world.
Sure.
Your loved one is dead. Your loved one's in coma. Your loved one is paralyzed. I mean, these are things we talked about all the time, often many times in one night. And kind of our reflexive presumption was that this was a big stressor, and I think it still is. But
Absolutely.
Our reflex presumption was this has really got to add to the burnout, because man, it is hard to talk to people and give the worst news they've ever heard in their lives, right?
Right.
For our patients and their families, these were the worst days of their lives. And one of the guys very bravely at some point, because everybody's kind of nodding and saying, yeah, it's really hard, it's really hard. One of the guys, I thought very bravely, said, I got to tell you something weird here. And he said, sometimes I come out of those talks actually feeling kind of good, kind of warm and tingly and good. And then one after the other in the group, there's our whole team, started saying, well, to be honest, I do too.
Sure.
And what we began to realize is that, often we're in situations there where we're not going to actually help the patient. We can,
right.
The die is cast. But that family is suffering like hell. And it gives us a chance, if we do it well, if we do it as well as you can in a scenario like that, it gives us a chance to still be doctors, to be trying to alleviate suffering. And so it turns out that, it may have also been a resilience builder to some degree. If you could, and how do you do that? You got to, at least for a few seconds or minutes, release your empathy, release your sympathy and your compassion. Remember, Absolutely. I said it's all bottled up, but I think
right.
for those few minutes when we're discussing that with the families, that all of a sudden we're letting it get into our hearts, let into our souls, release it for a few minutes where it potentially is helping the patients, and then, oddly enough, then all of a sudden we'd shut the door down and march off to the ER, right?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, very much back to the warfare analogy. That's very much the quick prayer before you load in around and get back to battle. I mean, what else can you do at that point? You have to, you're absolutely right. You almost have to have that tunnel vision in those circumstances where, you can't really look to the spiritual world or this other side. One of my favorite parts in the book, of course, I think Lynn and I also talked about this, was your use of music throughout the book to kind of reinforce, because I myself am a musician, many different genres, I love music. But one of my favorite parts of it was the incorporation of Come As You Are. When he hits that pothole and he pops up and he's going down and Come As You Are starts. Funnily enough, I actually had a guest on just last week that his show will probably air before this one. But he had written a nonfiction true crime book about String Bean, the banjo player from Hee Haw. And I noticed that you also played banjo, so I had to ask, are you familiar with String?
Back there, I don't know.
I thought I saw one back there. I had to ask, are you familiar with String Bean and that whole story in the banjo?
I don't know the story. I know, I certainly know. I've seen Hee Haw many times.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. He, of course, was from Kentucky. He and his wife were brutally murdered in Nashville in the late 70s, which sparked a whole thing. The book is amazing. But the reason I bring him up is because I compared String to Kurt in a lot of ways. This tragic hero who, who was kind of a voice of his generation in a lot of ways that then gets lost. And, with the introduction of Kurt Cobain into the whole narrative, it almost later on, there's a scene with the shotgun and the shotgun shells. And of course, infamously, that's how Kurt Cobain chose to end his life. I had to ask, was that a symbolism that you were kind of thinking about when you introduced Kurt into that?
Yes, but I do have to confess that it didn't originally start there.
Okay.
So, well, a couple of confessions. Originally, the book was 260,000 words. It's down below 100,000 now.
Hey,
because I learned, people tell me very quickly in getting into the nonfiction world that nobody was going to read it unless my name was Stephen King. So I didn't change my name, and I started cutting a lot of things out. So I was really worried though that, some things may not connect up, but that was one that eventually it worked for me. But originally it actually was a less good choice. Originally it was People Are Strange.
That's a fine one too.
And I was, and I was going more for the dystonic music,
sure,
the dystonic chords and stuff. And one of the early readers said, everything in this book is rooted in the 60s. You realize you're showing your age. And they said, you might want to modify things a little bit. And so I started thinking first on the music scale. And then I thought it's a great, I think it's a spooky enough.
Absolutely.
Series of chords and distortion and stuff. And then it fell into place because of those connections. And I said, oh man, that works perfect for me.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, even Kurt Cobain is outdated, I guess, but at least it brought it into this.
Though I could, and maybe this is just me being, into music as much as I am, and me making connections, right? But I could draw a thorough line from Jim Morrison to Kurt Cobain to modern music, real quick. I mean, and I think Kurt is still a name because he did influence so much music afterward that everybody's going to come back to. And if you know the story at all, as soon as that shotgun enters later on in the narrative, you're like, oh, and it was kind of heart-wrenching because, I am such a big Nirvana fan and I am such a big Kurt Cobain fan. And when that shotgun comes up, I'm like, oh, this is what this is. And I knew immediately. And it's heart-wrenching. But no, I love that aspect. And again, not to give anything away to the reader, but there is a twist at the very end of this book that involves a music hero of mine that I loved it as soon as I reached that part. As soon as I reached that part, I was like, yes, this is the perfect ending to this book.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Because I have to tell you, when, again, I sent it out to early readers, if you will, and they split 50-50. 50 were pissed off at me for the ending. And 50% were like, oh man, I love that.
Hey, that's when you got something good. When 50% of people hate it and 50% of people love it, that's when you've got art.
Well, that's probably a great way to look at it. Maybe I like that. I like that.
It and kind of keeping with that theme, it also kind of introduces at the end, and we kind of touched on this already, but the theme of the duality of Ryan's experiences. And this is something that I love touching on in the paranormal in general. A lot of people tend to think, and a lot of times experiences like these, fiction or nonfiction, can be very traumatic and very terrifying and very reality bending and, leave you questioning, am I going crazy? But then there are, I would say, as many events, maybe lesser, but a significant number of events that are miraculous, that are incredible, that are angelic. And, it seems like the phenomena at large, whatever that is, ghost, alien, Sasquatch, whatever weird thing shows up in your world, it kind of splits 50-50. And it's either terrifying or it's something that changes your life for the better. And in Ryan's case, they kind of congeal, and he kind of talks about that at the end, and the duality kind of good and evil in a way. And that might be heady, but I was wondering if you could kind of talk about that and how you kind of came to that part of the story.
Yeah, I have my own. It's just like you. You called yourself an optimistic agnostic, right?
Sure, yeah.
And I am very much in that category. And
Absolutely.
I guess so. We're going to get deeper into this in a longer story than you may want, and I may forget what I'm actually answering. But originally, I went into college really planning to go in the seminary. So originally I was,
talking to you, I saw you more as the Reverend Ron character than I did Ryan. So it's interesting you say that. And kind of sidebar, you kind of are Reverend Ron. You had written these 3 books on burnout and trauma. But anyway, continue. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, not at all. But so I definitely, there is this, has always been this part of me that is searching, that's looking for the answers beyond. And again, I mean, I ended up a biochemistry major and, med school and neuroscience and all that stuff. And so again, it all kind of, well, here's the way it is, and there's nothing beyond these confines. And then you start saying, well, really, is this really what it all comes down to? Anyway, so I played with the concept in just a little short piece I wrote a couple of years ago. It's never been put out. It's on my website if anybody wants to read it. But it's I called it an exit interview. It's just a guy who dies. He finds himself in a nondescript office, and he's got an interview with God, if you will.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Definitely going to check this out. Yeah.
But anyway, they get talking about all this stuff. And one of the things that God tries to explain to him, and again, this is me just playing with concepts, and it goes back to, I mean, this is no great thinking of mine. This goes back to the great religious philosophers and stuff like that. But God starts talking to him about the idea of free will, and how do you establish free will? Well, you can't have free will if everything is perfect and everything works for you. You have to have choices to be able to have free will. So God is trying to explain that we kind of put you into this nascent state of being a human being, so that you can start learning how to use free will and interact with free will. And we get talking about how, the guy goes, well, why do you put evil into the world? And God says, I didn't put evil into the world. That's you guys. You're choosing not to, live well, because you have the free will to do it. And then he talks about, because one of the biggest questions for a neurosurgeon, and this certainly got into it in this little piece, but is, why do kids have to suffer, for example? Why is a kid lying there with a brain tumor?
Absolutely.
And that sort of thing. And that's one of the harder things to face. And, it's just the suffering of innocence. And again, it ain't Gary Simonds who's come up with these great ideas of, of why this would happen. But what he said too, and I think this is something to bear in mind as well, is again, we have this very limited scope and version of what the world is, what existence is, very limited computer to process it.
Absolutely.
And one of the biggest ones is time. And, we're around for such a nanosecond.
Absolutely.
Compared to the full extent of existence or of everything. And, and so if you look at on that scale, the suffering that we know of, that we think about, that we worry about, is just super short.
Yeah.
And yet the lessons from it may be tremendous, that, maybe we learn compassion and empathy and how to deal with loss and all these many things. And yet against the scope of existence, it's nothing. So anyway, I just played with those thoughts and where this all leads and where good and evil fits into all this. I even put in that little piece, I put angels, that God does send angels. And these are we're all born kind of as angels, able to perceive more than that's out there, but we lose it as we get,
oh man, I love this.
but the people we consider angels are people who maintain a little bit of that glimpse, and they may be, so, I made certain rock stars, for example, for the music side.
I love it. I love it.
Certain are angels, but they don't know it. They just maintain this little taste of
absolutely
a greater extent. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question now, or
No.
I've gone completely off the track, but it's those sort of thoughts to me that played into those ending things, and
Absolutely.
why I didn't want it signed, sealed, and delivered. Here's the answer. And who were the good guys, who were the bad guys, and that sort of thing.
Absolutely. And I love that, because so much of my work in the unknown and the unexplained is alien abductions, for instance. A lot of people want to automatically assume, oh, well, these beings are taking us against our will, they're extraterrestrial, they're doing these experiments on us. That's definitely a narrative that people have presented, but there's also this narrative of these beings are taking us to see our long departed loved ones. They're imparting these great, in-depth pieces of wisdom to us. So it kind of becomes, I say this a lot with the ethereal, it becomes really hard to tell who's the good guys and who's the bad guys really quick. And the whole last of this book really does a good job of dealing with that.
Yeah, I hope so, because that was one of the things I wanted people to think about, and as they say, to contact me and discuss with me, is like, in the end, if these were ghosts, if they weren't just his mind misfunctioning, and they were ghosts, were they good or bad? Or were they a mix? Or is there, we have a mix on Earth of human beings.
Absolutely.
If there is an afterlife, is there a mix of the undead or whatever they are?
Absolutely. And I love that question is kind of left up in the air, and, there are no, it's very much email me and we'll talk about it. And I love that.
Exactly.
I love that. Oftentimes when I talk to authors, I think almost every time I have talked to an author or another creative, I've always asked them, not only what led to the writing of this book, but it seems like, especially with something like a novel or a film or something that, takes months or years of your life to make it, it always seems like there is this, maybe not always a clear and concise message, but it seems like there are lessons that you learn throughout the making of this project. So in the making of Death's Pale Flag, have there been any of those things for you that at the end of it you can look back and say, oh, this was very much what this project was about for me, and this is why I've done it?
That's an interesting question. I don't usually put it in perspective of myself, to be honest. The easiest thing that comes to mind is, it's a hell of a lot harder to write fiction than it is nonfiction.
I could definitely see that. I'm a freelance writer myself, so like I write copy, which is not anything near, but I write a lot of just nonfiction and research stuff. And writing fiction over writing that can, it's definitely a change of pace for sure.
It is. I guess I'm never happy with it.
Yes.
I could sit down and completely rewrite that book right now. It's already been rewritten 20 times, and I'm not happy with it. Whereas the other books, I'm kind of like, yeah, they tell the story. I mean, they're basically what needs to be told.
Right.
But I think fiction is, it's like all of a sudden the doors are blown off.
Yes.
And you can go in any direction. You can say anything. I can have UFOs land on my front lawn.
Right.
I can become a master spy.
Sure.
So in the original 260,000 words, there was a witch very prominently involved. There was a pro football player there. I mean, all these, there's just, it's like, this unlimited availability, unlimited options.
Absolutely.
And so I guess anytime I go through it, I'm just kind of like, oh, you could have done that better. This could have gone in another direction. This could have gone in another. It's, I'm just thinking of this right now, but there's an interesting parallel. I'm gonna have to write this down to myself. I should write this at some point. But thank you. But no, there's an interesting parallel, and that's I was just thinking with research in science. When you're doing research, it's very boxed in. It's, and this is one of the reasons why, again, I think we have a lot of hubris when we start saying, oh, science explains this totally. To make an experiment reproducible, meaning, somebody else can do the exact same thing and get the same results, which is the key to it
good
being
science.
Valid.
Right.
You have to have reproducibility. Well, you've got to set your parameters very tightly. You got to have no confounders. You got to have no variables. It's got to be, this is the setup. Well, and as soon as you do that, it's not a real representation of the world.
Right.
It's very constructed. It's very contrived. Anyway, that is an excellent point, though. I had never considered it that way, but you're absolutely correct. That is no longer its natural settings. Right, and again, therefore, for us to then roll out of that and say, "Oh, you're wrong. This couldn't possibly exist." I'm happy being a optimistic agnostic.
I love it.
But the parallel I was going to draw is, even though you have all those tight constraints, once you start doing research, you'll see something happen and you go, that's weird. I wonder if we change this dynamic. And all of a sudden it sprouts in a million directions. And so the good researchers, I know I'm not, but the really good researchers have these really expansive minds where they're, you say, I wonder if, we bury toads under a full moon, whether that will have any effect on the incidence of heart attack in this city. And a good researcher, a good one is kind of going, well, that's interesting. Wow, I've never thought of that.
Sure.
And they'll start playing with it in their mind. You can see them setting up experiments and stuff.
Absolutely.
Like that. But anyway, it's kind of neat because that's, when you're writing a novel, I think that's what happens. All these worlds and all these questions and all these different directions open up. So I found myself, people would say, well, what genre is your novel? And I'm like, oh my God, I don't know. I don't know what it is, but I know some of the questions I want to ask with it. And then
absolutely,
as you're writing it, other questions start popping up that,
yes.
I would love people to think about that. I would love people to think about that. So I would say that's, again, one of my big lessons was it's harder to keep the animal in the pen because it wants to escape or something like that. And then another thing I think for me, and hopefully the readers are picking up on it too, but it's funny, I lived this stuff for several decades and it didn't hit me as hard as it did when I wrote the book. And that is how fragile it all is. Yes. How fragile everything we hold on to, everything we love, everything we care about, it can be gone in an instant. Yeah. And it did remind me that, oh my God, stop just going through life as if in a haze, it's the old saw, but smell the flowers, listen. I noticed bird song more than I ever did in my life. And I'm like, I got on my wife, oh my God, has the area been invaded by birds? And there's so many of them and they're so loud. And she's like, no, it's always been this way.
You just
never noticed.
Absolutely. And, I talk a lot of times about, in private conversations of my life, I talk a lot of, and I probably mentioned this on the show before, I talk a lot about the little tiny gears in life that there's no reason really to worry, because the things that we worry about, all these little gears have to hit a certain way for that outcome to hit, just like all those little gears have to, work out a certain way for us to be. So it's all very fragile. It's all, dependent upon it's the butterfly effect. Whether you believe that in a supernatural way or just simply a demonstrable way, everything is built upon, well, if this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And it's all very, it could all fall apart at any moment.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's interesting. You can dive way down into the real depths of neuroscience and look at how one nerve communicates with another, and it is super complex. It is super delicate. It's super sensitive to the elements. It can be changed in, a nanosecond.
Right.
It's part of how our brains learn and work and stuff like that. But man, can it get knocked off kilter so easy. But there's a terrifying or a nasty or a dark side of what you're discussing.
Very much.
Which I think is another important message, not necessarily from the book, but maybe to just people thinking about this stuff, is whenever we deal with these horror shows, with these terrible tragedies, and more on the trauma side, but you can see it with the illness side as well. But there is so much guilt that is carried by everybody around. The entire universe around that person, whatever size it is. It could just be a couple of family members, or often you'll come in and there's 40 people in the waiting room waiting for news. But they carry this horrendous guilt because one of those tiny gears 5 weeks ago, they said, why don't you get your car's muffler looked at? And they didn't. And now the car was loud, and he looked at, to see why it was so loud and steered into another car. I don't know, they will blame themselves for the whole disaster because of one tiny gear in that whole mechanism that you're just talking about. And that was, to me, one of the biggest enemies in that job was guilt, was trying to just, take down the guilt and say, this is horrible. It happens all the time. Nobody here is responsible for it. This is, the cosmos align badly sometimes. And unfortunately, your loved one was at the epicenter of it this time. But it really is one of the biggest things that we have to battle, is the guilt of the families and friends around these disasters. And just, I think your way of looking at it is just a perfect conceptualization, because it's not the big deal. It's once in a while you'll get the ones where I knew he was drunk, I should have stopped him from driving. Yes, that happens. But more often than not, it's some tiny piece weeks ago, and you just, how do you combat that? All you can do is, kind of be there and let them talk it out and work it out. Well,
that's very interesting to hear you say, because I mean, I've seen this in my own life. There are plenty of times that, I've lost somebody close to me, and immediately everybody around that person will say, oh, well, if I had done this differently, if I had done this differently, if I had done this differently, maybe, but ultimately, exactly what you said, the cosmos aligned not in favor of that. So it's very interesting to hear somebody who deals with death so often say that, because, I think that as so many times when you deal with a trauma like that, you ask those questions. You ask, am I the one at fault? Is this person the one at fault? And then, you also say, no, that's impossible. This is just the way things lined out. But you have no frame of reference so often as somebody who has just lost someone or something. So to hear someone who has seen this event play out over and over, it's interesting to hear you say that guilt is one of the most prevalent aspects of the shadow side, I guess, of this whole thing.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And it is. I was talking with somebody the other day. Unfortunately, in these tragic situations, the mind just shoves away everything that's good.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Focuses on some, nasty piece. I guess that's part of the grieving process, but it's really important for us to help each other out to get over that hump of just saying, no, these things do happen. We are fragile beings.
Yeah.
Sometimes we can't control everything. We live in a society right now where we do control so much, and death really isn't so in our face. If it were in the Middle Ages, I'm not sure if they went through the same levels of guilt, at least. But it is, I think, again, thanks to science and technology, we kind of think, well, I have a control over everything. Everything is going to work out. And boy, I think we saw it with the pandemic that, man, the wheels can come off pretty easy.
Absolutely. That kind of goes into this idea I was wanting to touch on. You kind of mentioned in there, and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning of this conversation. Just the fact that death, I'm sure you've heard of the idea of simulacra and simulation before, the Jean Baudrillard, and how so much of our life is not real. At least it's not survival. It's not right there on the line of, we get online, we check our emails. Well, probably nobody's going to die, well, in your profession, someone may die over an email, but in my, generally nobody's going to die over a missed email, but we put so much stress on those things. And we put so much emphasis on, well, I need to control this. I need to control the traffic. I need to control, but really what life is, and this may be a bad analogy, but it's running away from a predator. It's building shelter. It's building fires. It's making sure that your family stays alive. And in a way, very much like you said, technology, science has gotten us away from that point of understanding, hey, life is really staying alive. It's being happy. It's and let me think of a way to round this into the question I want to ask. And I think in these situations where you are presented with a very visceral thing, a very visceral, natural occurrence like death, because at the end of the day, it is natural. All of us will go through it at some point. All of us will have to deal with it eventually. I think, I guess this is less of a question and more just honing in on your point that death is still this very visceral thing that we have no control of, that science cannot give us an explanation of what's coming next fully, or that, that we can't understand in the confines of all of this technology and all of these things that we think makes our life what it is now.
Yeah, I 100%. And I was just thinking, as you were saying, perhaps this is part of the reason why we have so much worship of science right now and technology, because it really has been able to push it back quite a ways.
Right.
It's really been able to take out a lot of the former risks where, just drinking a cup of water back in the day could have done it, at any time. And so science has given us this tremendous gift, but it's almost like we've kind of deified it. Now science knows. Well, I defy any scientist to tell me what happens after death. And so, so here we think we know it all. We think we have everything, figured out. We have such control over our existences. And then we have zero control over the fact that we're going to die. And we have zero concept of what the undiscovered country is going to be like, right?
Exactly.
We do not know the slightest bit, and any scientist who says, "Oh, I know exactly," they're full of it.
Yes,
we have no clue.
I often say, and this is a very controversial take for some people on this, but I think you'll understand what I'm saying. I often say that none of us know what is going to happen. None of us. Right. You can, Christian, Islam, Buddhist, neurosurgeon, farmer, none of us know what's going to happen after this. It's all up in the air. And none of us really know what exactly is going on.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fantastic mystery, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, if you're into mysteries, you can't get a bigger one than that.
Absolutely.
And therefore it kind of leaves things open in every direction. And yes, I mean, I have another piece. I'll send you a couple of these pieces.
Absolutely. I will include them in the show notes for anybody wanting to read.
All right. But it actually starts about Christmas carols and why we don't get to hear Christmas carols much anymore. And it gets into science versus religion. And
that does sound like fascinating.
But even if we know in our hearts that we have the answers, it's still a matter of faith.
Absolutely.
And faith is believing in something that you have no proof of. And again, the scientists who says they know, they're just showing their faith. I also, on the agnostic thing, and I'll probably get a lot of people mad at me for saying this, but I think atheists are just as religious as anybody else.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
Yeah. If you believe,
yes.
If I believe I know there is no God, particularly if I go out and proselytize it,
right.
There is no God. You guys are fools. I'm like, you have no more proof of that than any of us for any other conceptualization.
Absolutely. I say that often.
Good. Well, at least we're not at war with each other. I mean, in some ways, if it wasn't so kind of scary on one side, it's almost fun knowing that, we have this stunning mystery on the other side. And I think that's probably why we also kind of, when we do hear about these near-death or post-death experiences, we kind of go, our ears perk up and we
Absolutely.
go, really? Did you,
Absolutely.
You? And we even touch upon that in the book, just very briefly. I think I did longer in the long version, but in that, if somehow there was incontrovertible evidence that there are ghosts, that turns everything on its heel, right?
Absolutely.
I would say then religion no longer becomes a religion, it becomes a science. You're just trying to study the afterlife as opposed to try to decide.
That is an absolutely good point. While we're on the subject, I got to ask you this and we'll round it out. I don't know if you've heard about them, but there's currently all these disclosures coming out from these government insiders saying that the government has craft. And I mean, that in its way, and of course, I'm a big person of let's see how it all turns out. But if that turns out, that's very much that same idea, right? That turns a lot of long held beliefs completely on their head.
It would be, again, you would see a lot of scientists' heads explode.
Very much so. And there's a term that I use on the show that I just want to give to you and see what you make of it. The religiosity of science.
Yeah. Oh, I 100% agree. And again, we're all victims of
Absolutely.
our worlds, right? Of our environment. So
Absolutely.
I would imagine, your mind has been opened further and further just by doing what you've been doing.
Sure. Yeah. The more you stare into the abyss stares back, kind of thing.
But I think what happens for a lot of us in the scientific world is, again, we're just used to, we want concrete answers. We want a p-value of less than 0.05. And we forget, again, those artificial settings that we set everything up with so that we can get reproducibility.
Right.
And so our minds start to close off. We're it's, again, when you're dealing with science, you've got to have this mindset, but it's I've got to see the proof. I've got to see the data.
Absolutely.
I've got to see the p-values. I got to understand, where this is coming from. The interesting thing is that, so many things that are quote proven end up getting disproven 10, 20 years later.
Right. Absolutely.
So I think there is a tendency to get religious about science,
for sure,
about what we know and don't know. But again, it seems to be that I was just thinking about this as another piece to write, but it almost seems to be a need, right? It almost seems to be a need of ours to feel certain about things, because we just got through saying, wow, what a mystery it is to recognize that despite everything we think we know nothing about death.
Sure.
I mean, we know it's going to happen. We don't know why it's going to happen. We don't even know why we're here. We don't know how we got here. They tell me that, how many billion years ago it all just came out of nothing. Well, how the hell's that happening?
Right, exactly. Absolutely.
And that sort of thing. So I think when confronted with that big a mystery, which really just kind of trumps everything else, we probably want things that we can hold on to and believe. It's soothing maybe, and
absolutely.
So I think we're all religious to one degree or another, and as they say, there are no atheists in foxholes. I think we're going to fix on some belief system. You and I believe in not knowing anything.
Absolutely. Exactly. Yes. And that is kind of the human need, right? We all have this need, I think in a lot of ways, and I've talked about this with other writers and other creatives before, but I think what the human need really is the need for stories. It's the need for mythologies. It's the need for a narrative that tells us what has happened and what will happen.
Right. So why is that? Why do we need that?
That's the question, right? Like that's the mystery for me. That's where the mystery lies. Well, Dr. Simonds, it has been amazing to talk to you.
It's Gary, by the way.
I understand, but honestly, you are the first doctor I've spoke to on the show, so I didn't know whether I should call you Dr. Simonds or Gary, but I'm happy to be able to call you Gary. It was a great conversation with you. And hey, I've got one more question for you. This kind of come in the show notes, but I couldn't stray away from this question. Okay. You mentioned at the beginning of the show that your mother and grandmother were straight off the boat from Scotland. And I talk a lot on this show, getting into the supernatural lore of the area, how the Appalachian Mountains are the same mountains as the Highlands in Scotland. And I myself have a lot of Scottish origin, so, I'm very partial to that part of the world. And of course, in Scotland and in that area of Europe, the legends of the Fae are everywhere. And that was, and that so plays into modern stories of ghosts and of aliens and all of those things. But I was wondering if you would please delight us with one of those Scottish ghost stories from your childhood.
Yeah, there are many. I'll give you a couple, but you're right. By the way, I live in Black Mountain, North Carolina. And out behind us, beautiful view of mountains called the Craggies. And this was based on, it looked like Scotland. And
right.
And anyway.
And actually your area has a lot of UFO history that I don't know if you're aware of.
I have heard that. I haven't dug deep into it yet,
a lot. Very interesting.
I'll have to look into it. By the way, I one of my retirement goals, but I've been in the book and I'm still teaching, so the
sure
teaching takes up more time than I thought it would. But anyway, I am going to teach myself the bagpipes. I have them, and I'm going to teach myself.
Very nice.
There are a lot of banjo music that is very related to Celtic music.
Oh yeah. And on a sidebar on that, I just learned through the streaming book that the banjo actually comes from Africa originally.
Yes.
And isn't it interesting how all of those instruments play so well with each other? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Anyway, so we're in the heart of a lot of great bluegrass music, by the way, and stuff like that. And even, the banjo, apparently, now this may be apocryphal, I don't know, but I was told that the banjo became enjoyed or favored by Scots coming to the country because of the fifth string, because of this drone string, because there's a drone that goes on in the bagpipe as well. So they could kind of sense some sort of the musical theme.
That is very interesting. I'll have to look into that.
By the way, you ever want to read a great book, it's talks kind of the world that we're into without the ghosts right now. It's called This Is Your Brain on Music.
I was definitely going to check this out.
So it's written by a neuroscientist, but he's a very good science writer in that I think he makes things pretty understandable. And he gets into all the various areas of your brain that are used to put together music and why it appeals to
This sounds amazing. I think I have heard about it before. I'm definitely going to check it out.
Yeah, This Is Your Brain on Music. I thought it was a fantastic book. But anyway, my poor grandmother who lived with us, she had a million, and there were little people and fairies and all that sort of thing. But
that is very much the world in which I live, the little people and the fae and such.
But she was crazy enough that, everybody just kind of said, oh, Granny, she's crazy.
Sure.
But my mom was, also a firm believer. And she was the type of person who would go into a house and say, ooh, somebody died in this room. And it would turn out she'd be right. She could feel.
She had
Yeah. How do you know?
Yeah.
And she'd say, I could feel, there's a coldness to this
sure.
or something. But anyway, when she was again, I love my British roots. So it's going to sound disparaging, but it's not. But even in the book, I kind of talk about how, how many Brits believe in
yes.
ghosts. And it's like over there, if you say, I just saw a ghost, nobody's going to say, you need to go to the psych ward. They'd say, oh, really? Where?
Well, that was old so-and-so from...
right.
Yeah.
But so my mom, when she was early teens, they moved to England. The family moved down from Edinburgh to England.
Okay.
And my grandfather was at that point, he managed a pub. And it was, like an inn and a pub. So they
sure.
lived upstairs, and my mom was in a room, and she started complaining that people were coming in her room in the middle of the night. And they're saying, what are you talking about? Oh, I'd wake up and find that the dresser had moved, or somebody would be lifting the end of my bed, or pulling the sheets down, or opening the window. And they were like, well, tell us if it happens again. And it just kept happening.
Sure.
So finally they started looking into it, and they were trying to figure out whether trains were going by and she was just feeling that, or bus. Anyway, they could never figure it out until they finally contacted the old owner of the pub and said, explained it. And he said, well, what room is she in? And they said, oh, room 3 or whatever it was. And they go, oh, well, yeah, no, that room's haunted. Everybody knows that. and typical Brits, they were like, oh, well, that explains it. And they never moved her out of the room.
It's just ghost. It's fine.
It's a ghost.
It's a ghost.
So I'll give you one more, which I think
absolutely
is a little more, I think it's interesting and chilling. But
This piece of audio has been removed in response to a breach of the Interdimensional Treaty of Non-Organic Long-Term Colonization. For more information, listen in to the Midnight in Kentucky 2023 Samhain Special, coming soon to the MIK stream.
So, my mom was a confirmed believer in all this.
That is very interesting. It sounds like your mom was like a lot of people I talked to. I think a lot of people with the paranormal assume that, and I used to think this as well until I really started studying the phenomena, that it's something that happens to you once and then nothing ever happens. You may see one UFO and then nothing ever happens. But the reality is, if you've had one experience of the paranormal, you're probably going to keep having experiences of the paranormal. So it sounds like your mom was someone who had many different experiences and encounters.
Many different. And by the way, and this was a brilliant woman. Just
sure.
One of the smartest people I've ever known. But she, she had one time, this was in England too, but she was driving a car. A person stepped out in front of the car and she hit him. She was in hysterics, called my dad and all this sort of stuff. And but nobody was there in front of the car, and they found out somebody had been hit there a couple of days before. So she, again, I mean, she was full of these stories. So people always ask me, well, how many times have you experienced it? And I'm like, I wish I had. I wish I had what she had. But the closest we came was when we moved. We moved back to England when I was 9, I guess, for a few years. And for whatever reason, once we got to England, they broke out a Ouija board. And we started doing the Ouija board, and my sisters, my mom, and I. My father, distinct disbeliever, would try to do things to scare the daylights out of us. But the first time we sat down, the board said, "Missed you, Joy." That's my mother's name. And the assumption was that was the guardian angel when she came back to England. So apparently the guardian angel didn't follow her to America. And then, so the closest I got to one was one night, it just kept saying, "Kill the cat, kill the cat, kill the cat."
Jeez.
And we had a little tabby cat, and a couple of days later, it was run over by a car.
Oh, geez.
So we put the Ouija board away.
Sure. Yeah, I can imagine. Don't want to lose any more pets. It is interesting, though, that it said, "Missed you, Joy." Me and my eldest daughter, she's kind of starting to develop an interest in all of this, weird stuff. She just yesterday said something about, we were just joking around talking about, Faye being out in the woods and stuff. And she said, well, they can't come in here because, Fae legends say that they have to stay in certain places. So it's interesting that, this angel tells her, "Missed you, Joy." Maybe it had to stay in that place. Maybe it was.
There you go.
And I always love those stories where people are like, "Oh yeah, there's been ghosts there for years," or "There's been Sasquatch in those woods for years. It's fine. Just don't go there. It'll be fine." So. But
I love that they kept her in the same room.
Yeah, you'll be fine. Just don't pay any attention to him. It'll be good.
It's interesting. My wife and I went back to England several years ago to go hiking along what's called the British Southwest Coast Trail.
Sure.
Parenthetically, they said it was the rainiest summer in Britain's history, which is, you're really talking a lot of rain. It downpoured on us every day. But we went to her old pub, her old pub, and there's a legend of the pub's ghost still on the wall.
Oh, that is awesome. That is awesome. Very, very cool. Gary, it has been so good to talk to you. I can't tell you how much I love Death's Pale Flag. If you don't mind, tell people where they can find you, where they can get the book, all that good stuff. Where they can have conversations with you after they read the book.
Absolutely. So I have a website that's just my name, Gary R. Simonds. It's spelt like Simonds, Simonds, just one M, Simonds. So it's Gary R. Simonds at GaryRSimonds.com. That's my website. So that one's pretty easy to find. And on it is my email's in there, my phone number's in there. Anybody's welcome to try to contact me, and we'll, I'd love to have any of these conversations with them. And then what else do I have to tell you? Is that the main thing you needed?
I think that's it. I think that's all. Where can people get the book? Can they order it off your website?
Oh yeah, where to get it? So they can get links through the website. It's on all the major distributors, so the Amazons and Barnes and Noble and independent bookseller sites and that sort of thing. And so it will be real easy to get. There is a print version. There is a what do we call it? Ebook version. And then the audiobook is going to come out a little later, but the print book comes out June 27th.
Perfect. Okay, wonderful. Are you reading the audiobook when the audiobook version comes out?
I am not. First of all, I guess we all hate our voice, and I hate my voice. And
believe me, I understand. Every time I put it out an episode.
Oh no, yours is great.
Thank you.
Yours is designed for it. Mine comes out like a poorly tuned fiddle or something. But it So anyway, it's going through the production phase,
Sure.
and I'm having to listen to all and make sure I approve it. But it's pretty good. I think he's doing a really nice job.
Awesome.
In the audiobook.
Awesome. Well, listen, we will have to do this again when the 200,000 word authors edition comes out, because I can't wait to read that.
Oh man, I don't think you want it.
But thank you so much, Nightowls. If you're listening, we will be right back after this.
And there you have it, Nightowls. There you have it. Thank you so much to Dr. Gary Simonds for going in conversation with Midnight in Kentucky. And geez, what a conversation it was. We hit on so much that I feel like ultimately this show's about in the first place. The borderlines between science and the supernatural, the borderlines between shadows and substance, as the Twilight Zone would put it, the borderline between the mind and what the mind encounters in so-called consensus reality. And I use that term consensus reality because, I firmly feel that everybody's reality is different. You project your consciousness onto reality. And in saying that, and this is totally coming from me, this isn't something that Dr. Gary mentioned in the podcast, but I think, it would be really interesting conversation to have with him, and I hope I get to do that in the future. But in saying that about consciousness projecting itself on reality, I've been listening to a lot of stuff on Carl Jung lately, and reading a lot of stuff and doing a lot of Carl Jung work. And, there's something in Jung's work when he talked about UFOs that Jung thought that perhaps UFOs were a very real physical object, a very real temporary physical object that our consciousness projected or manifested into reality. Or at least he didn't believe that. He offered that as one of the as a possible, explanation. But in saying that, so many people think that that is explaining away UFOs. And in fact, it's not. In fact, that's something much, much weirder. The fact that we can interact with reality that way, and we can manifest objects into our reality. That's fascinating to me. And in my mind, all of this interplays with interdimensions and all kinds of other things. But the point of me saying this is to say that when talking with Gary, and I want it so bad to call him Dr. Gary because I respect him, and I feel like if anybody has earned that title of doctor, it is Gary Simonds. He is very knowledgeable about his work in neuroscience and neurosurgery, and he is also very knowledgeable about these borderlines between the mystic and the very firmly planted in physical reality. But in saying all of that, I say that because in talking with Dr. Gary, there is so much that reminds me of Carl Jung's work. The way he talks about the mind and the way he talks about those places between worlds of, again, science and supernatural. There's no better way to phrase it. But before I get fully invested in saying all this, let me first say that Death's Pale Flag, the novel that Dr. Gary come out with back in the summer, is an amazing read. Like I mentioned in the podcast, it's very much, to me, a war journal of a neurosurgeon who is constantly at war with one ailment, one tragedy, one medical emergency to the next, and some very, very gruesome, graphic stuff. And it's not gruesome and graphic in the fact that it's gratuitous. It's gruesome and graphic in the fact that very real people deal with these types of emergencies every single day. And this is an excellent fictionalized war journal of a very real person, or an archetype of a very real person who deals with that line between life and death every single day. And it's also a man haunted. It's a man haunted by seemingly entities from that other side of the veil, entities from the land of death, and how this man interacts, because he does stand at the crossroads between these two realms on a daily basis. And there are so much deeper themes to this book. I talked with Dr. Gary in the show, or in the interview, about Whitley Strieber, and about how Whitley Strieber, who is a noted alien abductee, his visitors told him that everything that was happening as far as these abductions involved death. And, though Death's Pale Flag does not look into extraterrestrials or interdimensionals in that way, if you are aware of these things that supposed extra-dimensional entities have told us over the years, or, that ancient cultures practiced, that, right now is the time when the veil is thinnest between life and death. Samhain, Halloween, is the celebration of that. And as I said in the intro, the hero of this book, Ryan, stands on that line every single day, and he sees through that veil every single day, and it's very much a story of the abyss staring back at Ryan. So I can't recommend Death's Pale Flag enough. Such an excellent read. It's in the show notes. Both Gary's website and the link to buy the book are in the show notes. So please check that out. An amazing read. But we also talked about a couple of other. We also talked about a couple of other works that Gary has done. One of those is Angels in the Architecture, and you can find these on his website. They are free to read. I've linked both Angels in the Architecture and On Christmas Carols, which I just want to touch on briefly in just a second, in the show notes. So check those out and give them a read, because they really are awesome stuff. And like Death's Pale Flag, both Angels in the Architecture and On Christmas Carols deal with this theme that Gary seems to deal with a lot in his work. It's the what I would term the religiosity of science, like we talked about in the podcast, and it's letting science supersede the beliefs and the spirituality that makes us human. In Death's Pale Flag, for instance, there's an excellent scene where Ryan's wife is speaking with Ryan's therapist because she's worried about him, about what he's seeing, about what he's going through. And Ryan's therapist tells her that for all intents and purposes, Ryan seems fine. And he asks her, he says, if this were someone who was professing a religious experience, someone who went to church and had a salvation experience, we would probably congratulate them. If their child was being christened or whatever, we would congratulate them. Yet when people see things in this way, we immediately jump to mental health, and we immediately jump to something's wrong with them. And I thought that was an excellent point. I thought that was a great point in Death's Pale Flag. And Angels in the Architecture, I'm really having trouble with these titles. Jeez. Angels in the Architecture really reflects that as well. Angels in the Architecture, as Gary was saying in the podcast, is a piece on an exit interview from what I would say the physical realm. It is a person who has went on and is sitting with, I suppose, what you would term God, but in this story, God takes on a lot of interesting characteristics that I don't feel like many of us attribute to him, but that I personally love. And as fiction does a lot of the time for me, this story illuminated a lot of ideas that I hadn't yet thought about, and I think that's what great writing is. And I want to read just this little part from Angels in the Architecture because it's so awesome and it applies so well to this podcast. This is God speaking to this, very scientific-minded person who has died and is now receiving his exit interview from the planet Earth. You scientists are capable of such hubris, aren't you? It's certainly not just the uneducated who cling to their beliefs. It is just as easily the super-educated, like you, who think they have it all figured out. And in their own science-based mental map of existence, there's no room for other existences, other beings. This is why we introduce you to things slowly. Your world is just a snapshot of existence. It is purposefully limited and simplified, as it is your ability to take it in and process it. Through experience, you will come to perceive more and understand better all that is. But be aware, so many of the physical restraints with which you are currently familiar, and that may even anchor your perceptions, simply don't apply. And this is him speaking to God. Come again, physical restraints don't apply. Like what? And this is God speaking. Like time. Time is so very linear, unidirectional, and relentless to you. But what you think is eons against the true span of existence is nothing, just the blink of an eye. And I really like this idea because, of course, in our title theme, we say time is an illusion. And I always like to talk about time in relation to UFOs, ghosts, cryptids, because I really do think that time may play a part in that these beings may be more malleable of the time stream, or that they are outside of time as we humans perceive it. And I really like that little paragraph there at first before he talked about time, where he talked about it's certainly not just the uneducated who cling to their beliefs. And me and Gary talked that idea up one way and the other in the interview. But I will share this little anecdote because I'm sure some of the patrons have heard about it on some of the latest Patreon episodes, because Jamie was very upset about it, and I understand why. We put a lot of work into the show, and I feel like we offer a lot of. I feel like we offer both sides, or in respect to what we're doing here. But we're certainly not a skeptical podcast or a paranormal podcast. We want to report on that, and I don't want to report fake stuff whatsoever. I don't want to report hoaxes. I don't want to report misidentifications if I can help from it. But that's all part of the territory as well. But that being said, we got a message from a guy who was pretty upset about some episodes we had done, and blasted us. Scientifically speaking, just that he felt like we weren't offering enough evidence. He and this guy, this guy seemed like he wanted a conversation. And I said that. I was like, if I had more time, because I can't even get back to the people that messaged me and tell me how much they like the show. If I had more time, I would love to sit down with this guy, because he offered a lot of different angles of thought that I had not yet considered. But more than anything, a lot of his comments reeked of this scientific religiosity, this idea that the mainstream accepted science is all there is, and there will be no more. And that's anti-scientific. That's not the scientific hypothesis. The point of science is to reach as far as possible and grasp for the answers. And as I've heard several people say in recent days, isn't it funny how the assumed assumptions of what we call science decades ago are now being proven to be false? And what will happen in another 4 decades? And is that already happening? I kind of think it is. We're seeing the science of our elementary and high school upbringing, I'm going to show my age here, for us 30 and 40-year-olds, we're seeing that being a lot completely disproven, or at least added to and giving new context. And that's very much what Gary's work is about. Gary's work, and I loved having Gary on the show because he is a scientist, and he is one of few scientists, I feel like, one of few true scientists, I will say that, and that's me talking. One of few true scientists this day and age that truly respect the universal mystery that is supposed to be at the heart of science, that I feel like has been corrupted into science believing it has all the answers. And it's not just science, it's politics, it's religion, it's a lot of different things that feel like they have all the answers. But I will say this, Nightowls, if anyone tells you they have all the answers, be skeptical, because no one has the answers. No one has the answers. And that's what I love about so much of Gary's work, because he paints such brilliant stories and ideas with the things that we know now, or the things that, the science that has been accepted now. And he uses the science that is accepted now to paint the portrait of the mystery, of the great mystery that in the end we're all in search of. And like I was saying, his other work on Christmas carols illuminates this idea so perfectly. But I'm going to save that, because I actually want to have Gary on around Christmas time to talk about that piece, because I want to talk with him again about that, because it's so much this idea of the borderlines between science, supernatural, and spirituality that this show and kind of all of my work is about. So Again, thank you so much to Dr. Gary Simonds for coming on the show. Guys, check out his website, read his work, order a copy of Death's Pale Flag. It's such a great book, such a visceral book, such a visceral paranormal experience book. You guys will dig it. If you like this show, you guys will dig it. So that's it for this episode. Check us out online. You guys know where to do that. Facebook, midnightkentucky.com, the Patreon, the TeePublic, Ransom Letter Publishing, YouTube, all of that. Check out our sister show, Ransom Letter Radio, coming out with the full moon Samhain vibe check. Should be out around the time that this episode's out. So check that out, Ransom Letter Radio. It's wherever you listen to this show. Also, be on the lookout for the 2023 Samhain special. It's really something special. It's a special kind of special. And I just want to leave you guys this evening with this awesome quote that Gary has from this interview. It is worth hearing again at the end of the episode. It is in response to what he has learned from the writing process of this book and what it's meant to him. And it's a really great answer, and it's, something that I've learned in my journeys and my travels with the paranormal and the spiritual and the supernatural. So, till the next full moon rises, Night Owls, for Midnight in Kentucky, happy Samhain, good night.
And then another thing I think for me, and hopefully the readers are picking up on it too, but it's funny, I lived this stuff for several decades, and it didn't hit me as hard as it did when I wrote the book. And that is how fragile it all is. Yes. How fragile everything we hold on to, everything we love, everything we care about, it can be gone in an instant. Yeah. And it did remind me that, oh my God, stop just going through life as if in a haze, it's the old saw, but smell the flowers. Listen, I noticed bird song more than I ever did in my life. And I'm like, I got on my wife, oh my God, has the area been invaded by birds? And there's so many of them and they're so loud. And she's like, no, it's always been this way. You just never noticed.
You've been listening to Midnight in Kentucky,
a Ransom Letter Publishing podcast.
Join us on Twitter and Facebook.
Or get in contact with your questions, comments, or stories of high strangeness
at midnightinkentuckypodcast@gmail.com.